Welcome guys to another episode with the Doomed Hell. Today I've decided to make a video based off of a kind of, well, I don't want to say a fan request, but let's say a person who puts a lot of input in my videos. Recently, he let me know that he actually doesn't really like Asrock as a company. I have purchased multiple Asrock motherboards and I've had relatively good things to say about them. And I thought that this kind of hatred towards Asrock is a bit unfounded. And I mean, to be fair, I'm sure has been a lot of RMAing with Asrock motherboards, and potentially a time where Asrock was considered a cheap brand for motherboards. But I think that is kind of unfair, considering the last decade or so of extremely excellent quality motherboards that they have been releasing. And so I've decided to make a top 5 best Asrock motherboards that they've ever made. The top 5 mostly has the same kind of brands that you might think of in the very high end, but some of these are actually really impressive compared to even their counterparts of the same generations. And surprisingly, Asrock has been in and out on the chipsets and haven't really delivered the same brands on every chipset. So it's nice to still know what was the best at the time or what is the best for the chipset. Now, I've put this list up kind of intuitively, and what I mean is basically motherboards that are still relevant today based off of their features. I haven't really put the boards in historical context because I feel as though a lot of these boards, they don't really fit in a retro gaming setup. They more so fill up the I want modern features on a budget motherboard type thing, which is kind of what this whole channel is about. It's about purchasing used components which does the job for modern tasks. And so let's start with this motherboard, which probably has aged the best considering it is also one of the oldest motherboards I'm going to talk about. And this is the Z87 Extreme 11-AC. Now, this board from the get-go kind of looks crazy. Firstly, we have a VRM that isn't split up. If you can't tell, well, if you didn't know, Z87 is a consumer platform motherboard, and around this time a lot of companies had realized that splitting the VRMs kind of part on the side, kind of like here, and then partly on the top in that kind of direction made a lot of sense for consumer boards, because the amount of voltage regulation you could actually get out of that in terms of amperage was pretty high, and you only lost a little bit of in static, or you only really lost a little bit in data transfer. So the reason why Asrock didn't do that is because they wanted to have a very wide VRM that was all completely connected to have no true issues with it. The second thing that's pretty crazy is the amount of fans you get on this board. Yes, Asrock has been going pretty crazy with their fan setups. They really like to cool down their VRMs as much as possible, which is really great and kind of cool in a lot of sense. We also get full-fledged quad SLI setup. I do believe there's a PLX chip involved in this setup, considering that we also have 3 small PCIe's, which also get mSATA or mini SATA chip connections, which is probably the first thing that this kind of negative, not really a negative, but one of the parts I would say this board is a bit old on, and that is the fact that it uses mSATA. Yes, mSATA is pretty useful. It's basically like running you get an SSD that's very small that runs through a SATA connection. I don't think it runs through a PCIe like true M.2 setup, but it does run at a slightly higher speed than SATA, which is very nice. And that's kind of crazy as well, especially for this era. You do get full-fledged onboard sound, which is cool. Not exactly a great feature these days, but a nice feature to have at times. And then probably the biggest thing, and the reason why a lot of people bought this board back in the day, was the sheer amount of SATA ports you would get. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times 6, so 16. I do believe you get 22 out of this board. 22 full-fledged SATA ports is absolutely incredible. You also get Thunderbolt 2 right here, 2 Thunderbolt 2 through mini display port, which is also a great benefit for these days, and a feature I consider an absolute must-have on all my boards. You get 2 USB 3 front ports. You might even get a third one, and you get this little port, which doesn't really look like anything interesting, but this one allows you to read the BIOS through a front USB, basically. And obviously later on, these are used for USB 3.2 Gen 2 X2. Don't think this is what that is. Next up is, I think that's pretty much it. Those are the main features. You get dual BIOS, of course, and that's pretty much it. So at first glance, it's a pretty crazy board. I think the only real negatives is you use mSATA instead of M.2. Not a huge negative, kind of like a half negative, half positive. And then the other thing is you can only run quad cores on this board. And although Z87 you had your 4770K and your 4790K, which is just as good as any i3 at this point, or even better than even some Ryzen 3s, and some Ryzen 5. Why not? You're still kind of limited in that sense. You don't have all the PCIe lanes you might want to have, although it is more than most consumer platforms. So overall, this is better than maybe like 50% of the builds you could build today, modern builds. I mean, like straight out of the store. Very interesting. So that's the first board I wanted to talk about. The next board, this is now at number 4. Number 4 is the X79 Extreme 11. And this board is very similar to the Z87. The biggest difference is you trade off the Thunderbolt and some of your SATA connection for a full-fledged LGA 2011. You also get more RAM and a lot more PCIe, especially that they're Express 3.0 this time. So I have this board personally, and I really like it. It's a very good looking board. I'm just very sad that I cannot use it because my chipset blew up. I have 2 PLX chips right here that are fully heat sinked. One of the largest VRMs you'll ever find. It's a 24 phase, which is very, very crazy for back in that day. I do believe the Z87 might have a similar setup. You obviously have up to 128 gigs of RAM if you do run an ECC. You can run an ECC on this thing. And you can run up to 64 if you're just running regular DDR3. So I think the biggest negatives on this board is, well, firstly, you don't get any M.2s, which is a very small gripe considering you can run NVMe boots on this board. Yes, you can, because it is PCIe 3.0 and the BIOS is actually pretty modern. The other thing is, although you can remove the BIOS through the BIOS chip right here, you do not get dual BIOS, which is kind of shitty. Everything else is very, very good though. So you get your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so 14 SATA ports, which is a lot more than regular computers, through the SAS chip, which is right here. Same thing with the Z87. There's a SAS chip here. I think this one is a bigger SAS chip. That's the only real difference. You get front USB 3, and like I said, huge negative with this thing is you don't even get Thunderbolt. So that's kind of shitty for people that do like Thunderbolt, like myself. But you do get a much better sound chip on this board, which is very nice. So let's go to number 3. Now number 3 is actually another and probably the last Extreme 11 that we'll talk about, and that is the X99 Extreme 11. Now what's great about X99 is obviously you get modern chips. This board is much more readily available than this one, which is really the only big positive you might get with this board. Due to the fact that you're running 2011-3, You do get 8 cores and 10 cores, which you may overclock, but you remove the possibility of Xeon overclocking, which means that some of your chips are going to be a lot more expensive. Now, to be fair, looking at the current CPUs you might buy, you can still get a 6900K or a 6950X for about $300 to $400, which is a lot cheaper than you might expect, but it is still slightly more expensive than X79. You do get more SATA, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's 18 SATAs, slightly more than X79, but less than Z87. You still get your PLX chips on this board. You get slightly less PCIe, but this time you do get M.2 readily available, which is amazing. And I do believe you do get Thunderbolt, but don't quote me on that one. I don't know where the Thunderbolt is on this board, but it might be in the I/O. It might be down here somewhere. Finally, you do also get dual BIOS on this board, so that is really cool, and you do get a pretty decent VRM. So overclocking on this is not a problem whatsoever, except for obviously the fact that DDR4 doesn't overclock that well on X99. So this is a very good board, especially if you're looking for modern gaming. Now we're going into the top two. Now, top two, I decided to go with a top two that, like a kind of a rare top two, and then go with a mainstream top two. So the board I decided to go with is the Z270 Supercarrier, which, if you don't know, the Supercarrier is kind of between an Extreme 11 and an OC Formula. Notice that I have not talked about OC Formula yet, and we'll get into that in a second. So the Supercarrier is really cool. Firstly, it's on LGA 1151, which, although it is pre 370, so it won't support any 6 or 8 cores, we'll get into that in a second. So, firstly, right off the bat, this board has 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 SATA ports, so that is still very good, a lot more than you might expect. It has 3 full-fledged M.2 ports, which is really good. It does run a PLX chip to allow you quad SLI, which is extremely good, especially for 1151 the socket. Much better than what you might get on LGA 1200 or 1700. I don't think you even get quad SLI at all. So that is also extremely good. Now, the main reason why I chose this board over any OC Formula boards or anything like that is actually because on this board you actually get Thunderbolt and you get a lot more SATA ports. And that's a huge benefit for those who are looking to run those kinds of setup. You can even run eSATA, which, if you don't know, eSATA is basically SATA 4, and that allows you slightly more performance than usual. But obviously that's kind of locked to those who can use it, and to be honest, not that many people can use it. You actually need an eSATA port, which nobody really sold that. So, although you don't have that, you do have 2 USB fronts, and I do believe this is a USB 3.2 Gen 2 X2, if I'm not mistaken. This is kind of where they started inventing that, and although it wasn't standard with Intel, some manufacturers kind of started developing this kind of idea. Next up, do you get dual BIOS on this board? That is a very good question. I might be wrong, but I don't think you do. Unless it's up here, I don't see it. You do get Gigabit Ethernet, which is a first for Asrock, so that's really cool. And now finally, for the piece where we could talk about OC Formula or this board. So the reason why I put this board so high up isn't the fact that you're running a newer generation CPU than previous motherboards. It's actually the fact that Z170 and potentially Z270 can be BIOS hacked to allow to run up to Coffee Lake refresh CPUs, anything LGA 1151. And that's a huge benefit for those who are trying to game or those who are trying to build a budget gaming PC that allows you to have kind of workstation-esque tasks. So you can put up to an 8-core to this motherboard theoretically. And the reason why the OC Formula kind of takes the alternative route is because this board has no documentation of such a task, whilst this board does have documentation done by Lumi and other forum users in the overclockers.net. So this board does have documentation. The M-ATX version also does, because it only runs 2 DDR4 DIMMs, and so this is a good board as well. It has better overclocking, but it does not have any Thunderbolt. So if you do want something that's a bit more overclocker friendly and potentially like LN2 overclocking or anything like that, especially for Coffee Lake refresh, this is also a really decent board. You still get quad SLI, you still get good sound, etc., etc. But I do prefer this board overall, as it has Thunderbolt. That's just a must-have for me. So any of these 2 boards is good. Now we're going to get into the very last board I want to talk about, and that is the X299 OC Formula. This is one of my favorite boards. It's the last of the before last of the OC formulas that they've ever released. The last one being the Z590, which is a board I've considered buying multiple times in my life. Now, what's cool about this board? Well, firstly, it's one of the only long M.2 supported motherboards. It looks as though it doesn't have very many SATA at first, and that many DIMM slots, but it does actually have, your 8 SATA ports, which are standard on X299, and it also has, does it have U.2? I don't think that's U.2, man. Does it have U.2? I think it does have U.2. I might be wrong on that one. It has Gen 2 X2. It has all your buttons, bells, and whistles you might want on X299. It also has your full-fledged 5 PCIe 3.0 slots, which is a must-have when you're on X299. It has very large VRM, which is what we want. And although it only runs 4 DIMMs, on DDR4, especially on X299, this is a must-have to be able to hit your 4000 or 4200 megahertz overclocks. So this is a very, very, very good board. It does have a Thunderbolt. Pretty sure it has a Thunderbolt header here somewhere, and it's just a great. It's probably the best board you could buy currently. From Asrock, maybe unless you're talking about Z590 or something that's a little newer. This is the best board you can buy in terms of workstation, in my opinion. You have a lot of cores, a lot of single core performance if you so choose, and you have all the lanes, the PCIe lanes you might want to have, SATA ports, and I think you do have U.2, and you also have long M.2 support, which is crazy. So that's the whole video today. Happy New Year's, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this little kind of recap on good Asrock motherboards and why Asrock is a good company. Mostly just because they make some of the best motherboards. They kind of tried to change their the public eye by making some of these really cool Lamborghini-esque boards. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and have a good day.